Good morning. My name is Dan Noone. I'm the CEO of G2 Goldfields, Inc. We trade on the Toronto Stock Exchange under the symbol GTWO and on the OTCQX under the symbol GUYGF. With me today, I have my Vice President of Exploration, Boaz. He's calling in from Georgetown in Guyana. G2 Goldfields is a gold exploration company with their assets in Guyana. We have discovered a high-grade gold system in the Ghanie district in Guyana. We have an initial resource of 1.2 million ounces at an average grade of 9 grams a tonne, and we put that out last April. We've been drilling since then, and we've made a new discovery in November called the Ghanie area, which lies to the south of the Oko Main Zone and north of Reunion's Block 4. We also have a number of other targets near surface, which we are exploring at the moment, and we'll talk about that today.
Great. Guys, Dan, thank you very much for the introduction. Boaz, really nice to see you again. We spoke, I think, early last year when we did a technical introduction to the project. And Dan, we spoke about 3 months ago when you gave us kind of a quick update at the beginning of the year. It's in some ways, it's a slightly strange call because it's not very often that you have, I don't want to flatter you, but you have as much success as you kind of expected. Geology normally is unexpected, but things have kind of been going as you expected in the last 12 months. I mean, Boaz, do you want to just talk about what you were aiming to do and where you've got to at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So sometime around mid last year or so, we made a conscious shift to focus on sort of close to the surface targets and effectively aim to get a near surface discovery or a few additional discoveries close to the surface. Now, above the April 2022 resource, which we put out on the Oko Main Zone. So one of our top targets there was the Ghanie Zone, which is south along strike of the Oko Main Zone, which we've sort of followed through. And after a reinterpretation of the geology there, we figured that there was some strong potential across about a 1.2 kilometer strike length on the principal shear there. And that's what we followed through with this GDD series of drill holes from about, I think, September last year. And that's went really well, and that drove the Ghanie discovery. But it's really following up on some geological concepts which we had been developing effectively since we made the Oko Main discovery, and sort of building out on that to aim to get some level of predictivity in our geological targeting as we step across, not just around the greater Oko area, but across the entire district all the way through to our northern and western targets. From Oko Main all the way through to the Iron District.
Okay, so what are the broad kind of characteristics, geometric kind of characteristics of the Ghanie Zone? You know, what are you looking at in terms of grade and thicknesses as a rough guide?
Yeah, sure. So as we go along that 1.2 kilometer strike length of the Ghanie principal shear, there are some zones where it gets as wide as plus 40 meters, so average grades in excess of 3 grams, and then there are some areas where it gets a bit narrower. Only to like 10 meters, a bit over a gram and a half sort of thing. But one that's really controlled by it's the southern continuation of what we had described at the time as the S2 parallel shears in the Oko Main deposit, continuing across the difference coast unit, which is a very magnetite-rich volcanic rock. And what we're seeing there is that there's a very late crenulation folding architecture on those mineralized shears. And where we get the dilational zones, it sort of broadly corresponds to where we're getting full closures within that shear structure, and where it sort of thins out is where we're on the limbs, where we're getting those narrow zones of mineralization. So what we're predicting is across not only this target, but perhaps a few others that are analogous to this sort of Oko Main and Ghanie overall structural geometry, is that as you go north to south along the shears, we'll get these sort of pods or lensoidal plunging bodies where we get broader zones of high-grade mineralization within these plunging chutes, and they'll have a certain geometry, which we think, in the case of Ghanie, is a moderate plunge to a northeasterly direction. Okay, I'm putting that all together. I think it's obviously worth mentioning that the Ghanie Zone runs down to your ground boundary, your license boundary with Reunion, and they are stacking up similar
plunging shoots of good thicknesses and good grades. I mean, I know that last week or this week they published a spectacular intersection of over 100 meters of over 5 grams gold. But it is plunging shoots of mineralization, and that is what you're seeing, what you just described to me at Ghanie. And you mentioned the magnetite mineralization in this rock package that you're exploring here. And Dan, I seem to recall that you picked up this on one type of geophysics, magnetics, whereas you defined the Oko zone on a different style of geophysics. And so can you, within the 1.2 kilometers, is there something you can use to pick up the fold noses where you get the greater dilation and the greater thicknesses, or do you just have to do it with a drill, systematic drilling along the trend?
No, I think actually once you get to that magnetic unit, which it's Ghanie, the Ghanie Main Zone is about 1 kilometer long, and at Ghanie West is probably about 800 meters long. Once you're within that unit and along the shear, it's really, you drill it and you'll see it's because your magnetic body's not changing much, so you're not seeing that folding. But when you've got that magnetic body within non-magnetic surrounding rocks, you see the folding quite clearly. So we can get to I suppose we can see the folds in that magnetic unit, but not at the smaller scale, really just on the hundreds of meter scale, I suppose we'd say that. It's a good question. It's the one we talk to ourselves about, but at the end of the day, we just keep drilling along those shears in that magnetic rich host rock, and we always hit the shear, always hit mineralization, and then when we orientate all the core, so we can tell whether we're in a fold closure on a limb depending on the orientation of the veins and the actual planar foliations as well.
How many rigs are you using at the moment, and how many are on Ghanie West at the moment?
Currently we've got 2 rigs running because we're drilling very short holes, so we actually we're up to hole 57 at Ghanie, I think, and we've only got assays back to hole 30, so we're knocking out a hole every day and a half. And we've got 1 rig up on extending the Oko Main Zone on shear 3 and shear 1 to the north. We see those zones continue. As we get deeper, we'll get a 3rd rig going because basically we'll need the holes take longer, and so you're only really targeting those 50 metre wide zones at the bottom of these holes. And as we get going further, we've got 4th rig which will get going on Oko Deep again, and that will come after we have Brett Davies out this month or next month to give us a full geological structural picture, so we can start targeting deeper in the Oko Main Zone, because those holes are expensive. So, and when we do see thickening and thinning once again along those trends, so we'd like to go down and hit 14 metres at an ounce rather than 2 metres at 8 grams when you're down 600 metres. So that's the goal there. So with 2 rigs at the moment, we've got availability of 4. We could get more, but we find that at that rate with the assay return, and it is an iterative process. Any more than that, and we start getting behind in our knowledge of what we're actually drilling.
And you certainly don't. No exploration company wants to make rush decisions on the location of drill holes. They always have to be carefully considered.
And to add to that, I'd say at the moment, because we're in the discovery phase, hitting these near surface targets, we drill at Ghanie. We had the first hole. We stepped out 25 metres down, 25 metres. Fairly cautious about where we're going. Once we've drilled it and understand it and where that shoot is, we move on. So we've drilled Ghanie to 100 metres. We may go to 150 with the most recent hole. We'll move on, hit the other targets. We'll come back and do step-down drilling and definition drilling later in the game when we actually have a good handle on what the geometry is. That becomes easier. When we're still trying to figure out the geometries, we like to be a bit more cautious about how much we're drilling. But between surface and 100 metres, we can pretty well figure out where these things are going, and then we just move on to the next target. We'll circle back and drill deeper in all these targets later.
So if you're drilling to, let's say, a vertical depth of about 100 metres, and does that mean your holes are up to 180, sometimes 200 metres? Is that roughly the maximum hole depth you're putting out at the moment?
At the moment, generally down to about 150 metres would be the maximum, although the most recent one we're drilling at Ghanie, which is another step down on the plunge, is a 310 metre hole, I think, Boaz.
Yeah, that's right. And those are specifically targeted ball just to go down plunge of some of those hybrid intercepts, which would have been released recently. So it's kind of going down plunge of like OKD 26, OKD 13.
And so when you talk about the high grades, I mean, these are the intervals of kind of 44 metres at 2.3 grams gold. You had 16 metres at 4, was that right? Or was it the other way around?
Yeah, well, the OKD 30, in fact, intersected 16.5 at 7.3, but it had within the high grade footwall zone, which is sort of something that is a bit of a common theme of the central portion of this Ghanie Target. That drill hole, I think, had about 4 meters, 27 grams, if I recall correctly, and then OKD 26, sort of to be on the side of that central area, intersected like 26.5 at 4.1 grams. This deeper drill hole was effectively a 50-meter downward and step out on that, just to test for continuity of mainly the higher grade footwall section of the principal Ghanie shear.
Do you have, as you're beginning to understand the geometry and the geology and the controls of mineralization at Ghanie, are you stepping out in the same way that you stepped out on Oko, or is there a higher or lower degree of variability along strike and down plunge?
Down plunge, I think we've got a fairly similar geometry to the overall sort of first order control of higher grades within the Oko Main Zone, which is generally that northeast plunging sort of orientation. Along strike, I think that mainly because of the nature of the Oko Main deposit being hosted in these very discrete shear structures, and you have veins that are fairly continuous within more ductile rocks, you generally have a little bit more continuity of the higher grade, in particular in the Oko Main Zone, along in comparison to the Ghanie Target. However, within the Ghanie Target, these sort of broader zones of mineralization, they're not like one discrete structure like a quartz vein or so. It's within sort of a shear corridor, like an envelope of high strain within the rock. So we have got, in fact, there are higher densities of narrower centimeter to several cm wide veins within these corridors, and where you get the higher veining density is generally where the grades, which correspond with those full hinges I was describing earlier, is generally where the grade gets higher.
And Dan, I think a question for you, please. In terms of what you're trying to do, you've spoken about putting out a mineral resource update in mid-year, and everything that you do, I have to kind of look through the prism of what's happening to your neighbour to the south. And I think Reunion are also aiming for a possibly preceding you or predating you by about a quarter. You know, I think at the end of Q2 they're looking to put out a maiden resource estimate. What's at the board level? What are you kind of discussing as the priority for 2023 in terms of directing the exploration program?
I think for 2023, our main priority is to make the footprint as big as possible at surface. So we're targeting all the surface expressions of mineralization. The goal at the end of the day is to define something which can have as big a throughput per annum as possible. And so that's done by hitting near surface targets as opposed to drilling deeper. We'd like to have hit all our near surface targets, the obvious ones to date, by the middle of the year. We will put a resource update out in the third quarter, and that will be mostly the Oko Main Zone, plus what we've drilled to inferred at Ghanie. Nothing else that we've drilled to date will make it in there yet, and stuff coming. So there will still be, once again, here it is to date, and there's more to come. But we think we do need to update it because we're still stuck with the thought that we have 1.2 million ounces that we put out last April. And so we're on that, rat wheel, and we will continue to update that resource. But once again, it'll be an interim resource. Contain all that we've got.
Dan, thank you. So I understand that about kind of defining the envelope of mineralization. Quite curious, you mentioned earlier that you're going to be drilling some deeper holes on the Oko Main Zone. Is that really? Why are you prioritizing those this year? I mean, if you're targeting kind of surface mineralization and pushing that envelope, what's the rationale behind those deeper holes, which will presumably be quite a far dated economic ounces?
Well, I suppose it would be, but when we left off with the bottom of shear 3 and 5 where we've drilled to date, we've had some rather good thicknesses with plus 15 grams a tonne, 20 grams a tonne material. So you add ounces quickly, and the answer to that, I suppose, at the end of the day, when you're looking for the metrics, when you're looking for a sale or a merger with somebody, ounces in the ground do count. Obviously NPV counts as well. The mineralisation does continue still, so it would be amiss not to keep targeting down. But you are right, the priority for us at the moment is near surface ounces. But I mean, Oko Main Zone is such a beautiful deposit, it'd be a shame not to continue to explore it to depth.
And it kind of gets me thinking about the global drill meter budgets. What are you talking about for the remainder of this year? How much have you done in the Q1, and where that is distributed?
Yeah, okay. The exact numbers I think Boaz could probably give us is probably about Q1 would be about 7,000 meters. Boaz, about 2.5 a month. Is that the rate we're drilling at with 2 rigs?
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. So as we get deeper on these zones, we will add more rigs. So we may get up to like 10,000 meters a month, and so you can say over the next 4 months we might drill another 15,000 meters, 20,000. It really is dependent on how many rigs we've got running up. We're still at near surface, hitting near surface targets. You can say about 10,000 meters a quarter. If we start coming back and drilling deeper on those targets, it'll ratchet up. And if we get 4 rigs going, it'd be like 15,000 meters a quarter. But it's very much dependent on results, and that's what is drummed into us by our chairman all the time. We can drill as many holes as we like, as long as we can justify them. So, and I think it's a good philosophy.
And given the trajectory of results so far, and the apparent understanding on correlation of your drilling and the results that you're getting, I mean, you can never say never, but is it likely to say that you could probably 10,000 meters in Q2 towards maybe 30,000 meters for the year on top of the 7,000 you've already done? Is that a kind of a fair assumption, or is that a bit light?
That's a fair assumption as it stands, but it could quite easily get a lot more than that. If we turn into a position where we need to go and drill resources out on all these things because for whatever reason, we would have the ability to step that up and drill a lot quicker. Like I say, the focus at the moment is hit all the targets and make them bigger, but we can come back and drill all these things to depth at a rapid rate if we have to.
What's your success rate at the moment? And perhaps this is one for Boaz. In terms of how many barren holes are you hitting? Dan, you mentioned that you're taking kind of a relatively cautious approach on your step outs.
Yeah, that's a good question. If we were to be specific on the Ghanie Target, in this GTD series of drill holes, there's not a single one that has failed to intersect a single assay less than half a gram. So as a metric. So and that came back to I think that was a function of the reinterpretation of the geology that we did there prior to the drilling of this GTD series. Overall project to date, we haven't quite quantified it, but if I were to take a rough average, I'd say it'll be something realistically around about 65% of holes that we've drilled that intersected somewhat economic grids.
Yeah, I would say I think it's like nearly 70% of the holes fell into the initial resource at Oko Main. And I would say at Ghanie, when we put a resource out, I'd say at least that, I would say a similar number, 70% of the holes will make it into the resource category.
And what kind of intersection will kind of turn you off, and which kind of intersection will turn you on? Do you have a kind of a gram meters of 10 or 20 or 15 that kind of is will draw you in, or just say actually this is getting colder, we're going to back away from that?
Oh, I would say first of all, did we hit the geological target? So if we hit the quartz vein in Oko Main, or we hit the shear zone at Ghanie, it's like, well, okay, that's good. How wide was it? And that's a win. We keep going. Then if you get down to less than, the minimum width at Oko is about 2 meters and 4 grams cutoff we're using, right? So as long as that's continuous, as long as the shear has at least that, and it's continuing, well, then we keep going. Because we know it pinches and swells. So it's not let's stop here, but it's like, okay, we're on a limb, we're not in the main zone here, but the mineralization is still continuous, the geology is still continuous, is important, and then we keep going. Because we know it'll come back, it hasn't stopped yet. I think more it's when we don't get the structure, it's probably we scratch our heads and say what's happened.
When we first spoke about Ghanie, it was, I think you picked it up through a bulldozer cut that you picked up 50 odd meters at 1 gram a ton, and so I approach Ghanie as a kind of an open pit, kind of slightly lower grade, more diffuse perhaps than Oko Main Zone, but still with good grades for an open pit and some good thicknesses. Boaz, you mentioned that there was some kind of footwall high-grade mineralization. Does that make you think that this could start as an open pit and kind of give you an underground potential depth continuation, or is it too early to talk about that?
No, I think that's absolutely a fair assessment. And so far, all of the drill holes that we've drilled, particularly in the Ghanie Central area, has indicated that, you've got excellent widths, sort of what could potentially be an open pitable resource close to surface. But then as you focus in around the higher grade zones in that distinct footwall area, we're generally seeing widths of plus 6 meters at an average of plus 7 grams out there. So
okay, you can go underground on that.
Yeah. It certainly has the potential to be economic in an underground scenario in the future.
Looking at that Ghanie section, you kind of 1.2 kilometers down at the southern portion of the license area. In a sense, you're in a system there. You're on a program. There's not much generative work that you're doing in terms of new targeting. Is that correct?
On the eastern side of the Ghanie Target, probably. However, there's an entire, still perhaps a conceptual stage target on the western side of the intrusion, because what we're predicting is that the Ghanie Target unit, which is that competent footwall unit that we have on our Ghanie sort of target, we're predicting that on the western contact of that, we're going to see strong sort of strain development within the country rock again, whether it be the sediments or eventually where we get up into the magnetite unit that's being folded around a bit further to the northern side of that target. And we've got a couple of outcrops and one drilling intercept, in fact, from the initial OKD series of holes in the Ghanie Target, which has so far proven that. So,
how far west are you talking?
We're talking within about 100 to 150 meters to the west of where the Ghanie main shear is. That's sort of this. Yeah.
And what's your exploration method? Is it geochemistry, geophysics, and then get the bulldozer out?
Well, it begins with a concept. So it begins with a geological idea and some sort of theory that we're going out there and test. And, all of these other tools and techniques, including the driller rig, it effectively goes out there and tests how close we were to reality. So it starts with an idea. It starts with a concept. We generally get some geophysics done, mainly with the ground magnetics and VLS. They screen it with sols where possible, and then you correlate those anomalies to the sort of geological concepts that we can generate based on the data that we have existing and any new indications we might have from the geophysics, from the magnetics in particular. And we get out there where it's possible for us to do trenching. We would test specific anomalies or other interesting conceptual targets and follow up with the drilling rig where necessary.
When you say kind of geological concept, I envisage that this is a kind of a deeply weathered environment and that it's actually very hard to see the geology. So, what do you base? Well, A, is that wrong? And B, if it's not wrong, what do you base your geology on?
It's not an incorrect statement, but there's still a lot of value in mapping saprolite. And I find principally because a lot of the strain fabrics in the rocks are very well preserved and are still mappable in situ in those areas, and that's where we've been able to leverage like our road cuts and our trenches in particular to help constantly develop new ideas and continue to refine our structural modeling. So it doesn't all come from oriented core and fresh rock drilling. A lot of it was input from observations in situ saprolite. So there's still a lot of value in that. I think it's not difficult to pick out, for instance, silicification and sometimes even sericite alteration in the saprolites, which are one of the key types of alterations that we have in our shear zones generally. So that's good. And where you're really lucky and you've got your eye in enough on what our series of rocks looks like in sort of as fresh rock, you're sometimes able to make correlations from the in-situ textures that you see where it's still preserved in the saprolite. You're able to map out the geological units as well, if you're not too high within the weathering profile. So you've got to be a bit careful about it and to a degree be honest about what you're not sure about, especially if primary textures are being obliterated where you're too high in the weathering profile. But it's still tremendously useful to focus in on saprolite mapping, and we've been able to do that to to a great extent to advance our target.
I think I'm displaying my the laziness, the fact that I haven't had to spend a lot of time operating in deeply weathered terrains. I think once you do that for a number of years, you get your eye in and you realise the value of geological mapping even in those weathered environments.
And I would say even to this one, I mean, our magnetic unit is so magnetic, even in the saprolite, it grabs hold of your magnet. It is particularly magnetic, so it's and that's one of our primary hosts, along with the carbonaceous mudstone. So both of them are relatively easy to pick in the saprolite.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been a really fascinating dive into your thinking and the exploration process on the project. Dan, perhaps kind of by way of summary, can you take me through your decision trees? I know you've just raised some money as well, so you're kind of quite well cashed up. Can you just talk me through what you're going to be looking for and what investors can therefore look for during the remainder of the year in terms of where you're guiding and steering the company and what you consider to be kind of the main milestones?
Okay, between now and the end of the year, certainly the first half is a focus on discoveries near the Oko Main deposit. So within 5 kilometres, we've probably got another 5 zones which we'd like to bring up to drill stage, from Ghanie West, Oko East, Ghanie North, Birdcage, and in the sands. So we want to drill all those. We want to put an updated resource out in the third quarter, and once again, that'll be not the end. It'll be just, okay, this is updated from the last year, and so that, and continue with that till the end of the year. We'd probably get back to Oko Main Zone. We want to build a structural model for the whole district. We have one now. We'll update that with Brett Davies coming out. We think we can really add value there on understanding where we can target a higher grade at depth in all these zones. And so we will continue to make discoveries and add ounces to the project as in a sensible, sustained manner. So there'll be lots of news. We'll be drilling the whole time. We may have a little break in drilling a couple of times in the wet to catch up with maintenance and catch up with assays. But in general, we'll be drilling throughout the year. We'll have drilling news, and we expect to make 1 or 2 more discoveries. Perhaps we'd like to say 3 or 4, but 1 or 2 for sure, I think, by the end of this year.
And where are you in terms of petrographic studies, gold deportment studies, metallurgical characterization?
I did the initial bottle roll test on the Oko Main Zone, and now we're just about to start a series of tests on the Ghanie Zone. Metallurgically, so some metallurgy. On the petrology, we've really just done XRF. We haven't actually done any petrology yet. It's fairly coarse-grained. We tend to know what the minerals are. And we're comfortable with the stratigraphy that we have. So we probably should do some of that, but we haven't. And yeah, basically that's where we're at.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Good luck with the drilling through the course of the year.
Thank you very much, Merlin.